Hi everybody. So I'm going to do my presentation in English. Even though I do speak Dutch, I don't do myself justice and I don't do my work justice if I don't translate that in English. So please bear with me. So I was asked to do a presentation on a research that was actually done 2 years ago as part of the Artes Fashion Masters strategy program. I was a bit surprised because, first of all, we are dealing with an online phenomenon that is starting to become obsolete, or maybe some people find it already obsolete, and I think an indication that nobody raised their hands when I was asked if you have a fashion blog says it all. So I had to dig deep, or a little bit deeper, to review this and make it more relevant. So I hope you still take something out of it. So the research was actually done on Dutch fashion blogs, but of course we are talking about the internet and we're talking about a space that is highly international and has a global reach. So I'm not just going to talk about the Dutch landscape. We looked at 3 participators that are involved in this blogosphere, and those are the consumers that respond to the bloggers themselves, as well as the connection the specific arena makes with fashion retailers and brands. So herein, we took a broad perspective on the fashion blogging landscape, including the social and visual identity it portrays and the evolution it underwent. So, So blogs and the individuals manning their helms have secured their position within this industry as veritable forces to be reckoned with. The blog scene has become a very provocative instrument in a market that challenges brands and challenges the industry in how to reach the consumers' hearts and minds. So that is why we don't even talk about blogs anymore, we talk about social influencers. And it's interesting that it does contain the word social in it, because it suggests an interactive space that is personable and approachable, but if we look at it, it really isn't. Blogging has brought a new way to develop and distribute content in a space where everything is out on the open. And I refer to this as the encoded world, in which a contemporary take on visual culture is depicted. And this is a code often of obedience and conformity on how the internet fame has been attained by bloggers or social influencers. And in this encoded world, the audience or the reader is the one who proposes the meaning. And the bloggers depict a juxtapose between a fantastical world as well as some kind of reality. So this is an interesting juxtapose because what we see is an engineered performance happening. Social influences herein represent the modern evolution of the individual. So there's a utopian ambition to create perfection through the photographs, which we often see, but also the products and the lifestyle it portrays. And this utopia is in fact very futile because, after all, utopias are built by humans and imperfect instruments. So this creates a tension between the expected effects of blogs, which are so desirable for some reason, and the ultimate finding that utopias are actually flawed. So not even bloggers themselves are able to keep up with this. Yet what is worth noting is that what the bloggers do is bring a different perception on culture, aesthetics, and identity that then takes a life of its own. So this identity construction of these social influencers is a sole invitation for more users and audience loyalty. And by analyzing the visual culture shown in the posts of the most followed blogs, we were able to pinpoint the success factor of these social influencers, which in a way is not really interesting anymore. And I'll tell you why in a bit. What we did is we analyzed and tried to understand the intentions of the bloggers and how their portrayals are carried out relating to traditional media forms, and how authenticity is put into question because of this. the idea of the individual behind the blog within the context of a cyberspace is then questioned. So because of this illusory kind of definition of reality perceived by the audience, herein we see that within the internet communication methods, it alters cultural processes by changing the basis of social identity. What we see is that social influencers are now undeniably part of the fashion ecosystem. And they bring a continuous presence before a set of observers, implementing influence on them, and by doing so, influencing consumer behavior. And that's where it becomes interesting for brands. The bloggers have come so far that they interfere with the choices of the consumers. So the image of fashion, because of this phenomenon, is starting to become multiplied. And a new generation has actually become a multiplier of perceptions and behaviors, which in turn translates in all of these thousands and millions of followers that we see online. And then the blogs become responsible for spreading brand identity. And this can be quite tricky for a lot of brands and retailers. The audience's participation has become more important concerning content because they do offer their opinions, although we have seen in the past that often this participation lacks depth because it becomes very superficial, but that is changing now. And what's interesting is that the internet offers everyone a possibility to expose their choices and opinions, creating a democratic environment as such. Where interaction becomes an integral part of communication. We all communicate online. So we could say that in this new world, it favors big innovations coming out of unconventional scenarios that now are starting to become conventional. And this is in contrast to major fashion brands that have tried to resist this, but ultimately can't, or they won't survive. So because of blogging, social relationships have expanded, building connections and languages outside the traditional methods of the industry. And we see it so ourselves because we start adopting a cyber language or an online language. So now that fashion is being influenced by the audience, it may have become the purest form of giving opinions freely. And also, new standards to values are being set because of this. And so this in turn is re-signifying the aesthetic system of fashion. So going back to the supposedly engineered performances, we see how internet fame is achieved by following a code that we then try to crack. And this was explained through a formula on how to generate a top blog. And as I said, this now doesn't seem very interesting. Because, well, as seen here at first glance, we think it's the same blogger, but in fact, every photograph is owned by a different one. So there is inherently a formula that is being adhered to. But what does become interesting is the anomalies that stem from this. So who is doing things differently? So for example, Love Aesthetics, which I think all of you know, a Dutch social influencer, from the start differentiated herself from the rest. So she resisted this supposed code. And she played by her own rules. She was able to claim visual references and familiarity that is only hers. And she has done so in such a way that her visual presence has become a brand in itself. And that can become interesting for other brands. Before, a quick link or a short story on a product or post would be sufficient to reel in an audience. Now it has become much more about in-depth articles coming from an expertise point of view. So this is constantly changing, whereas we see in traditional fashion media, which bloggers were criticized by, these are real journalists like Susie Menkes. Then it became more kind of superficial, and now it's going back again to this expertise point of view. So this is Man Repeller, and she really was able to embrace this aspect because she has basically become an expert on everything. Lengthy interviews, product reviews, posts. Did she necessarily study all these subjects? No. So the founder, Leandra Medin, started off with a very goofy and kind of eccentric high-end fashion style. And she grew into a significant business, clocking over 2.6 million page views every month. And now she grew into the blog into a team of people who are now running a viable business. So also an interesting deviation from the norm is Tabby Gevinson, who you also might know, and in her early teen years maneuvered herself through fashion weeks and through the Karl Lagerfelds and Anna Winters of her era. And today she not only turned her savviness into becoming a fashion editor of a teenage magazine, she's also a self-proclaimed feminist. And her followers were able to watch her grow into this through the years, creating a special bond with them. So going back to a Dutch example, we have Anna Nushin, who started a blog which really spoke nothing more about than boys, makeup, and clothes. But she became the anti-hero, because having fled Iran at 7 years old with her family, she has managed to become the Dutch version of the American dream, modeling for Hunkemuller, writing books, and presenting TV programs. And this brings me to my next point, which is turning a blog into a viable product. A product so well made, it competes with the best beauty lines out there. So founder of Into the Gloss, Emily Weiss, turned her beauty blog into a beauty line, Glossier. And she says that her products were a direct response to insights her and her editorial team have called in from community feedback and countless interviews globally. So she was really able to appeal to the demand of the market and of the consumer and deliver it, and listening very closely to what the consumer has to say. So smart, savvy, and young female embodiments are marking their territory from having started by their boyfriends basically photographing them to becoming huge players in the industry. But this also means we are at a point in evolution of blogging where only the strongest will survive. So in fact, it's a bit like Darwinism. Things get very stale quickly online, especially on the internet, and it kind of is the end of the blogger sphere as we've known it. But this has paved the way for new forms of business identities to take shape. So becoming a blogger now signifies making a business and generating revenue. But how to do it successfully is another question. So curiously enough, if we look at one of the biggest fashion bloggers of the Netherlands, After Dark, she went as far as creating an online shopping destination out of her blog. However, she called it quits after 8 years, stating herself that she felt stuck in a routine and stagnancy that she did not believe to. So this is kind of ironic because she credits her success to blogging, but she herself indicates that she could not keep up with this encoded world and this formula. So what does this mean for retailers? Looking at these examples, this exchange of information through blogging kind of simplifies a lot of things, but leaves a problem for the formal industry, which has not always understood this way of building relationships with the consumer. It really forced the industry to rethink and renew communication strategies to move away from the conventional way of advertising and selling. So when brands involve social influencers, they inevitably become responsible for the subjective spread of brand identities. And so this boundary between retailer and blogger becomes increasingly interchangeable as social media technologies mature and grow. So for example, the recent campaign of And Other Stories, where they involve Love Aesthetics to communicate the World Recycling Day, reeling in a lot of visitors to come and get their free gift and buy more. The Paul Smith Group, for example, uses the value of the personality of the namesake designer as one of the defining visual identities of the company. In creating a somewhat personal blog where posts take form of comments and recommendations from Paul Smith himself, rather than using a distant team through writers, the customers are able to share in his life and feel a part of the brand. Mansour Gabriel, also very familiar, should thank most of its success to social influencers because when they started, they really utilized this method to communicate their product. And now it has become somewhat of a staple item for all fashionistas to have. Other brands have tried to do so, but arguably, never achieved this kind of level of success. So what we can take away from this is that we have to be everywhere the consumer is. And just looking at how big data, for example, is becoming such an important aspect to marketing, the power that lies in the hands of social influencers means that everyone can very well become a fashion brand. Tracking traffic is not so much of importance anymore. The engagement with the audience is central. So again, we see a change where before the comment section used to be a very important part of a blog. Now it is a waste of time for a blogger to even deal with comments from users. In turn, the social media channels, whether it's through Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, they have become the prime sources to engage with followers on top of the website. So certainly we see brands adopting this method to engage with their consumers. So the blogosphere is changing, and it's changing rapidly, paving the way and playing by different rules as social media technologies develop. Brands will also have to take into consideration the rate at which blogs themselves are becoming accepted destinations for online shopping, in fact. So as fashion retailers scramble to define what blogs are, perhaps the most important question we should be asking ourselves going forward is, how will we define what a fashion retailer is? Thank you.